The Battle of Cedar Creek, or Battle of Belle Grove, fought October 19, 1864, was the culminating battle of the Valley campaigns of 1864 during the American Civil War. Confederate Lt. Gen. Jubal Early launched a surprise attack against the encamped army of Union Maj. Gen. Philip Sheridan, across Cedar Creek, northeast of Strasburg, Virginia. During the morning fighting, 7 Union infantry divisions were forced to fall back and lost numerous prisoners and cannons. Early failed to continue his attack north of Middletown, and Sheridan, dramatically riding to the battlefield from Winchester, was able to rally his troops to hold a new defensive line. A Union counterattack that afternoon routed Early's army. At the conclusion of this battle, the final Confederate invasion of the North was effectively ended. The Confederacy was never again able to threaten Washington, D.C., through the Shenandoah Valley, nor protect one of its key economic bases in Virginia. The stunning Union victory aided the re-election of Abraham Lincoln and won Sheridan lasting fame. Background: Grant's strategy in 1864. At the beginning of 1864, Ulysses S. Grant was promoted to lieutenant general and given command of all Union armies. He chose to make his headquarters with the Army of the Potomac, although Maj. Gen. George G. Meade remained the actual commander of that army. He left Maj. Gen. William Tecumseh Sherman in command of most of the Western armies. Grant understood the concept of total war and believed, along with Sherman and President Lincoln, that only the utter defeat of Confederate forces and their economic base would bring an end to the war. Therefore, scorched earth tactics would be required in some important theaters. He devised a coordinated strategy that would strike at the heart of the Confederacy from multiple directions. Grant, Meade, and Maj. Gen. Benjamin Butler against Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia near Richmond, Sherman to invade Georgia and capture Atlanta, and Maj. Gen. Nathaniel P. Banks to capture Mobile. Shenandoah Valley. The final coordinated offensive was to be conducted by Maj. Gen. Franz Sigel through the Shenandoah Valley. During the Civil War, the valley was one of the most important geographic features of Virginia. The watershed of the Shenandoah River passed between the Blue Ridge Mountains on the east and the Allegheny Mountains to the west, extending 165 miles southwest from the Potomac River at Shepherdstown in Harper's Ferry, at an average width of 25 miles. By the conventions of local residents, the Upper Valley referred to the southwestern end, which had a generally higher elevation than the Lower Valley to the northeast. Moving up the valley meant traveling southwest, for instance, between the north and south forks of the Shenandoah River. Massanutten Mountain soared 2,900 feet and separated the valley into two halves for about 50 miles, from Strasburg to Harrisonburg. During the 19th century, there was but a single road that crossed over the mountain, from New Market to Luray. The valley offered two strategic advantages to the Confederates. Second, the valley offered a protected corridor that allowed Confederate armies to head north into Pennsylvania unimpeded, and a hard-surfaced road, the Valley Pike, allowed relatively swift movement. This was the route taken by Lee to invade the North in the Gettysburg Campaign of 1863. In contrast, the orientation of the valley offered little advantage to a Northern army headed toward Richmond, but denying the valley to the Confederacy would be a significant blow. It was an agriculturally rich area. The 2.5 million bushels of wheat produced in 1860, for example, accounted for about 19% of the crop in the entire state, and the valley was also rich in livestock that was used to provision Virginia's armies and the Confederate capital of Richmond. If the Federals could capture Staunton in the Upper Valley, they would threaten the vital Virginia and Tennessee Railroad, which ran from Richmond to the Mississippi River. Sigel and Hunter Sigel, in command of the Department of West Virginia, had orders from Grant to move up the valley with 10,000 men to destroy the railroad center at Lynchburg. Sigel's force was quickly intercepted by 4,000 Confederate troops under Maj. Gen. John C. Breckinridge, and defeated at the Battle of New Market on May 15. He retreated to Strasburg and was replaced by Maj. Gen. David Hunter. Hunter resumed the Union offensive and defeated Brig. Gen. William E. Grumble Jones, who was killed in the Battle of Piedmont on June 6. Hunter occupied Staunton and joined with Brig. Gen. George Crook. His force of 20,000 men, ordered by Grant to live off the land, began a campaign of destruction. Early's campaign. Gen. Robert E. Lee, whose Army of Northern Virginia was being maneuvered by Grant into a siege around Richmond and Petersburg, was also concerned about Hunter's advances in the Valley. He sent his Second Corps, now designated the Army of the Valley, under Jubal Early to sweep Union forces from the Valley and, if possible, to menace Washington, D.C., hoping to compel Grant to dilute to his forces around Petersburg. Early was operating in the shadow of Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson, whose 1862 Valley campaign against superior forces was fabled in Confederate history. Early got off to a good start. He drove down the valley without opposition, bypassed Harper's Ferry, crossed the Potomac River, and advanced into Maryland. Grant dispatched a corps under Maj. Gen. Horatio G. Wright and other troops under Crook to reinforce Washington and pursue Early. Early defeated a smaller force under Maj. Gen. Lew Wallace in the Battle of Monocacy on July 9. But this battle delayed his progress enough to allow time for the reinforcement of the defenses of Washington. Early attempted some tentative attacks against Fort Stevens on the northern outskirts of Washington, but then withdrew to Virginia. A number of small battles ensued as the Union pursued, including the defeat of Crook at the Second Battle of Kernstown on July 24. Sheridan's campaign. Grant decided that Early's threat had to be eliminated, particularly in the wake of a cavalry raid that burned Chambersburg. He saw that Washington had to be heavily defended as long as Early was still on the loose. One problem was that Early's moves cut through 4 federal departments. Grant considered unity of command to be essential and recommended George Meade for the position, but Lincoln vetoed that because radicals had launched a major political attack on Meade. Grant's next choice was a man aggressive enough to defeat Early. Philip Sheridan, the cavalry commander of the Army of the Potomac. Sheridan took command of all forces in West Virginia, Western Maryland and the Middle Military Division responsible for operations around the Shenandoah Valley. His field army was called the Army of the Shenandoah. Sheridan initially started slowly, primarily because the impending presidential election of 1864 demanded a cautious approach, avoiding any disaster that might lead to the defeat of Abraham Lincoln. After a month of maneuvering with a few small battles between Sheridan and Early, the Confederates became complacent about the threat. Robert E. Lee ordered Maj. Gen. Joseph B. Kershaw's division to return to Richmond on September 16. Sheridan reacted immediately and struck Early with his entire force near Winchester on September 19. The Battle of Opequon was the largest of the campaign and Early sustained ruinous casualties. His army retreated to the south, taking up defensive positions on a long ridge called Fish's Hill. Although this position was theoretically nearly impregnable, Early lacked the manpower to hold the entire line in strength. Sheridan hit Early in a flanking attack on September 22, again routing the Confederates, who retreated to Waynesboro. With Early damaged and pinned down, the valley lay open to the Union. And because of Sherman's capture of Atlanta, Lincoln's re-election now seemed assured. Sheridan pulled back slowly down the valley and conducted a scorched earth campaign that would foreshadow Sherman's march to the sea in November. The goal was to deny the Confederacy the means of feeding its armies in Virginia, and Sheridan's army did so aggressively, burning crops, barns, mills, and factories. The operation, conducted primarily from September 26 to October 8, has been known to locals ever since as the Burning, or Red October. It encompassed the area of Harrisonburg, Port Republic, Staunton, and Waynesboro. Early was reinforced by the return of Kershaw's division and the arrival of Marge, Gen. Thomas L. Rose's cavalry division. As Sheridan began to withdraw down the valley and Early began to pursue, Union cavalry defeated Rosser at Toms Brook on October 9. The Union Army encamped north of Cedar Creek, in parts of Frederick, Shenandoah and Warren counties. Prelude to Battle. Believing that Early could no longer muster attacks after more than a month of battling, Sheridan ordered the 6th Corps under Marge, Gen. Horatio G. Wright to return to the Petersburg siege lines. However, Early's troops arrived at Hupp's Hill, just north of Strasburg, on October 13, deployed in battle formation, and began shelling Federal camps around Belle Grove Plantation. Carl Joseph Thoburn's Union division moved forward to silence the guns and engaged in a sharp fight with Kershaw's division, resulting in 209 Union casualties, 182 Confederate. Sheridan recalled Wright's corps, which by this time had reached Ashby's Gap in the Blue Ridge Mountains. He departed on October 16 for a conference in Washington with Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton, accompanied by his cavalry corps as far as Front Royal, intending that those two divisions would then raid the Virginia Central Railroad. However, Sheridan changed his plan when he was notified that Early was sending wigwag signals implying that Lt. Gen. James Longstreet's corps might join him from Petersburg. This was disinformation on Early's part, hoping that it would induce the Federals to withdraw down the valley. But instead Sheridan brought all of his forces back to the camps along Cedar Creek. In a letter of October 12, 1864, Lee told Early, "You had better move against him and endeavor to crush him. I do not think Sheridan's infantry or cavalry numerically as large as you suppose." Early examined the Union position behind Cedar Creek and found an opening. Expecting an attack across the open valley floor to the west, the Union left relied on natural obstacles for cover. Furthermore, Sheridan expected each of his subordinate commands to provide for its own security, using pickets deployed well forward of their camps. General Crook's army was not accustomed to that practice and discounted Sheridan's guidance, leaving the Union left more vulnerable. Early's choice was either to retire from the area to replenish his dwindling supplies or to attack. He chose boldness and planned an assault on superior forces. Using surprise to his advantage, crossed the North Fork of the Shenandoah River and Cedar Creek to attack the Union left, rolling up the line and defeating each part in detail. On October 18, the eve of battle, Sheridan was spending the night in Winchester, on his way back from the Washington Conference. Marge, Gen. Horatio G. Wright was in temporary command of the Army of the Shenandoah. Opposing forces. Sheridan's Army of the Shenandoah consisted of 31,610 men and 90 artillery pieces, organized as follows. The 6th Corps, commanded by Marge, Gen. Horatio G. Wright, included the divisions of Brig. Gen. Frank Wheaton, Brig. Gen. George W. Getty, and Col. J. Warren Kiefer. When Wright temporarily commanded the army during Sheridan's initial absence from the battle, the corps was commanded by Brig. Gen. James B. Ricketts. Detachments from the 19th Corps, commanded by Brig. Gen. William H. Emery, included the divisions of Brig. Gens. James W. McMillan and Cuvier Grover. The Army of West Virginia, commanded by Brig. Gen. George Crook, included the divisions of Coles, Joseph Thoburn, Rutherford B. Hayes, and J. Howard Kitching. The Cavalry Corps, commanded by Marge. Gen. Alfred T. A. Talbot, included the divisions of Brig. Gen. Wesley Merritt, Col. William H. Powell, and Brig. Gen. George A. Custer. Confederate Early's Army of the Valley consisted of 21,102 men and more than 40 artillery pieces, organized as follows. Ramseur's Division, commanded by Maj. Gen. Stephen D. Ramseur, included the brigades of Brig. Gens. Cullinane, Battle, Brian Grimes, Philip Cook, and William Ruffin Cox. Kershaw's Division, commanded by Maj. Gen. Joseph B. Kershaw, included the brigades of Brig. Gens. James Connor and Benjamin G. Humphreys and Coles. Henry P. Sanders and James P. Sims. Early's Division, commanded by Brig. Gen. John Pegram, included the brigades of Carl. John S. Hoffman, Brig. Gen. Robert D. Johnston, and L.T. Carl. William T. Davis. Gordon's Division, commanded by Maj. Gen. John B. Gordon, included the brigades of Carl. Edmund N. Atkinson, Carl. William R. Peck, and Brig. Gen. William Terry. During the battle, Gordon commanded a column of 3 divisions and his own division was commanded by Brig. Gen. Clement A. Evans. Wharton's Division, commanded by Brig. Gen. Gabriel C. Wharton, included the brigades of Captain R. H. Logan, Captain Edmund S. Reed, and Col. Thomas Smith. Lomax's Cavalry Division, commanded by Maj. Gen. Lunsford L. Lomax, included the brigades of Carl. George H. Smith, Brig. Gen. Bradley T. Johnson, Brig. Gen. John McCausland, and Brig. Gen. Henry B. Davidson. Rose's Cavalry Division, commanded by Maj. Gen. Thomas L. Rosser, included the brigades of Brig. Gens. William C. Wickham and William H. F. Payne, and Col. Oliver R. Funston, Jr.